6:02, I'll call the meeting to order, and the first item of business is adoption of the agenda. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Having adopted the agenda, are there any declarations, excuse me, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Minutes and business arising out of the minutes. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that the minutes from the December 3rd, 2025 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So several timed items. We will get straight to it. Do I have a resolution to go into a public meeting regarding building fees? Councillor.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that the council meeting be adjourned at 6:03 p.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to subsection 7(6) of the Building Code Act, RSO 1992, as amended.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I will turn it over to the planner for report 2025-137, sorry, from the chief building official regarding changes, not the planner. Turn it over to you.
Thank you. The report in front of you is one we would be doing every 4 years. It's just to ensure the building department meets the statutory requirements under the building code to maintain a substantial reserve fund and keep Zorra's building permit fees competitive with the market.
Any questions from council on the report? Not seeing any. Any members of the public, either here or virtually, who wish to speak to it? Not seeing any. Can I have a resolution to come out of the public meeting? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that pursuant to the Building Code Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 6:04 p.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And can I have a resolution to deal with the report?
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that council approve the building permit changes to the building bylaw and approve bylaw 61-25, the recommended changes being effective January 1st, 2026.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
A few comments, and I just want to thank staff for including the chart on page 12 of the report that shows what the increases will be, impact on 4 different types of construction. And I went through, and the percentage-wise, the increase on single-family dwelling would be 18.6%, on the barn 45.7%, commercial 26%, and the septic system 39.4%. So percentage-wise, the increases are significant. But the study that was done has really identified what it costs for the township to provide this service. So the question is, who pays for the service? Is it user pays, the people that benefit from it, or does it fall back to the on the taxpayer through the tax levy, because somebody has to pay this cost? The only alternative to not paying the cost is reducing the service level. So by increasing the permit fees, we are adding to construction costs. But if we reduce service level, that's going to lead to delays in construction, which in its own way increases construction costs. So I think of the 2 evils, this is the better way to go. We want to be efficient in construction, and by making our fees in line with what the costs are, I think that's a responsible way to do. But I would point out to anybody that's listening that even though the fees are increasing, the example that's given for the single-family dwelling would be a building permit of $5,263, but then there would also be development charges of $8,834. So that means that any new housing or single-family dwelling built in Embro, Thamesburg would be $14,097. But then for any place else that's not serviced in the township, you would add another $1,172 for a septic permit for a total of $15,269. So even though the permit fees are going up, it's still not the the biggest cost of that part of getting something built.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And a resolution to go into a public meeting regarding a planning application.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that the council meeting be adjourned at 6:07 PM for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I will turn it over to the planner for zone change applications, NN 5-25-11.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. So the application before you today concerns additional residential units, or ARUs. You may recall I visited your chambers on September the 17th of this year to present some preliminary findings concerning rural townships' experiences with ARUs as part of a request to initiate. So if some of these slides feel a bit familiar, that's probably why. All right. So this slide shows some the provisions that would be affected by this proposed amendment. And the intent of this exercise is to make minor changes to improve implementation and clarity and support greater consistency with municipal and provincial policies. Through our review, we discovered that gross floor area is not meeting all of the desired outcomes for lot coverage. So the bylaw would adjust how ARU scale is regulated by shifting away from gross floor area as the sole provision that regulates scale. The proposed amendment would achieve this in two ways. First, the bylaw would limit an ARU size through an existing definition, dwelling unit area, that is proposed to be amended to focus on spaces like bedrooms, kitchens, and bathrooms, while excluding areas unsuitable for living space. Second, ground floor area, or the footprint of a building, is proposed to be used to calculate lot coverage. A new definition for ground floor area would be added to ensure that the types of structures that affect lot coverage outcomes, such as stormwater management, are being counted, while adding exclusions for the parts of a building that are less of a concern, like eaves. In order to ensure that the proposed changes don't inadvertently allow for larger multi-story accessory buildings were not intended, the attached draft for your consideration today shows one approach to address that concern. So that would use gross floor area in combination with the proposed amendments to lot coverage to regulate an accessory structure size. An alternative approach, which is not reflected in the attached bylaw, could be to limit accessory buildings to a maximum of 1 story where appropriate. In addition to adding that definition to ground floor area I noted, we have some new definitions for distance from and detached ARU that would make existing requirements easier to calculate or improve the bylaw's overall precision. Whereas amending the definition for principal dwelling will clarify that the addition of an ARU does not change the principal dwelling into any other type of dwelling. And the intent here is to make proposals, if and when they do occur, more explicit. We can understand these next changes as those which improve consistency with municipal and provincial policy. So a provision is proposed to be added that requires ARUs to have direct access to a driveway shared by the principal dwelling, which is an official plan requirement. This is intended to incentivize ARUs to be located and remain within the established residential area on a farm, again, which is a requirement of the official plan and the provincial planning statement of 2024. Similarly, we're looking to clarify what the maximum number and whether planning process through an approval is required for detached ARUs. So this would depend on the zoning of the lot and again reflects existing official plan policy. Another legislative change that has happened recently is Bill 185, the Cutting Red Tape to Build More Homes Act, which has added new standards for ARUs. So it now requires for fully serviced settlement areas, an ARU cannot be required to have a more restrictive minimum lot area, and municipalities must permit a maximum of 45% lot coverage for all buildings and structures on a lot where an ARU is established. So the proposed amendment captures these requirements and would affect the R1, R2, R3, CC, and V zones in Zorra. So moving on to technical amendments. So this is where staff feedback really helped to shape the draft bylaw for your consideration today. For the sake of brevity, I won't cover all of the proposed changes, but these are outlined in greater detail in the staff report. For council's consideration, I'll flag some key considerations. So with respect to garden suites, we had consultation with staff across the municipalities, and that consultation suggested that dwelling unit area is an appropriate standard to use to regulate scale. So this, in addition to removing the minimum floor area requirements for garden suites, would create greater consistency between how garden suites and ARUs are assessed at the municipal level. Regarding MDS, we propose to amend an existing provision for minimum distance separation 1 calculations. The existing provincial guidance document essentially already provides this direction, however, has not been updated to explicitly explain or address how these requirements relate to ARUs. So we've reviewed some recently updated training provided by OMAFA, which clarifies that MDS 1 only applies to detached ARUs. So the proposed change in the bylaw would therefore add this distinction. And then lastly, we found some opportunities to make the implementation of accessory structures more consistent. I'll flag this for council's understanding. We proposed adding lot coverage requirements for accessory structures in the A1 and A2 zones. This would replicate the requirements of the RE and RR zones. That means 10% of the lot area or 170 square meters, whichever is the lesser. So this ensures both accessory structures and detached ARUs have an available provision to regulate lot coverage. In terms of next steps, we provided a recommendation to council to approve in principle the proposed zoning bylaw, and then a finalized bylaw would be brought back to a subsequent council meeting to be passed. I'd like to thank you all for your time today. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from council on the report? Not seeing any. Do I have any questions from the public, either here in person or virtually, to speak to the application? Not seeing any. Kind of a resolution to come out of the public meeting. Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, second by Mitchell, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 6:14 p.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And do I have a motion to deal with the application? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve in principle the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, file number ZN 5-25-11, to introduce amendments to Township zoning bylaw number 35-99, and that the bylaw be brought back to a subsequent council meeting for adoption.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. You okay if I go ahead? Huh? Are you okay if I go ahead? Yeah. I'm not gonna wait. Thank you very much. And now we're going to go ahead a little bit early, but we're going to go ahead to delegations. Richard Renew, Christchurch Lakeside Ground Maintenance Grant. If you want to come up, Richard, and just make sure you hit the little button and the little red light comes on, then we'll all hear you.
Sir. Go ahead. I'd like to present this by giving some quick background and where we're at presently and what we're looking forward to. This property we're talking about is the Anglican Church property in Lakeside. It was established in 1863 and has been present there ever since. That time, the original church and property having connections with the Ingersoll family, which I'm sure you'll recognize that name. Where are we at today? Well, we've come to the point where we have two buildings on the property. One is the original church, and the other building is the original railway station for the town. And when the train system closed down, the congregation purchased the building and moved it onto the property. And I think you can see from the pictures, and I hope you each have a copy of that, the location of those buildings. The church sits on the extreme east upper end of the property, and the railway station sits onto the west side of it. That is indeed the church hall and is a public space. So that gives you a bit of a background on that. We do also need to mention, however, that some things have happened that have changed things kind of dramatically for many churches. Like so many country churches, our congregational numbers have gone down. And we are part of the much larger Anglican Diocese of Huron. If you're not familiar with that, it's a huge one. It runs from Windsor to the east side of Kitchener-Waterloo, up to Owen Sound and down to Lake Erie. We're part of that larger group. The decision was made when our numbers started going down that our church would continue to be a full church, but limited now to what is called a church that has only 6 services a year. And so that really puts us in a situation that funds coming in are quite limited. That does not affect such things as weddings and funerals and that kind of thing, but it means basically we only celebrate at the major services. So it does limit some of our funds coming in. So that gives you a little bit of the background. Where are we at and where are we heading? Well, we have been aware, for those who lived in the area for many years, that one of the things that unfortunately Lakeside really lacks is a public space. And there just isn't an area to develop one. With that thought in mind, a number of years ago, we began to move towards the concept of let's make our space a public space as much as we can. To that extent, we encourage the use of the hall by the community as much as possible. The Women's Institute meet there. The Kintor Optimists, because they had no place to meet at all, meet there. Now that's a very small group, but as you know, they're pretty powerful, particularly with the soccer program that runs in Kintor. And so we've moved more and more towards the idea of let's make our property an open space, a space where people can feel that they can come and use that area. And more people refer to the church hall, not as the church hall, but the Lakeside Hall, which is a wonderful thing. Going to the future, one of the things we said, let's try to open our space more and more for people to be present. With that thought in mind, a few years back, we established on the east side of the building and of the hall an area where we have gardens, and it has become a place for scattering ashes as well. But it serves a dual purpose, because if you see from the pictures that we have there, we've tried to make it very much a public space. We have several benches, and these pictures don't show all the benches, but we're adding even more. And next year we're adding another area that is going to be a patio area with at least 2 benches there. And again, we're trying to encourage people to come and use the space, to come and enjoy the property. For the future, in the upper picture that shows the church hall, you'll see that there's quite a space in front of that. That will never be developed for funerals or for gravesite or any such thing as that. We've looked at that area and said we'd like to make this more and more a public area where people can come. And you may be aware that the local Masonic group closed down last year, but before they closed down, and I am a member of that group, there was a commitment from them that once the building that they presently own is sold, that a goodly portion of that money will be given to us to develop a public park space there, so that families can come and enjoy that space area. So we're trying to make it a very much public space. So that's our plans and hopes. So yes, it is a church, it is a cemetery grounds, but we are looking more and more to make it into a public space. but the costs are there to maintain things. And that's why we're asking for a grant to help with the maintenance of those grounds. The biggest cost, one of the biggest costs we have, of course, is the grass cutting and the maintenance. Most of the garden is maintained by volunteers. We don't really have the money to hire professionals. We have our next door neighbor, Shelley, who happens to be one of the former gardeners, head gardeners at the Shakespearean Festival. She knows a lot about gardening and gives us a lot of help. But still there are costs to try to maintain that garden and that space. So we're looking for some help here from the council. We recognize that there is a fund available through the Triathlon Fund. We feel this fits the criteria where we're looking for public space for people to be able to come and enjoy the property and feel that it is theirs. So that's our basic request that we're after here. And I hope that gives you the background information, and I'm certainly open to any questions or concerns you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
A couple of questions, Richard, and you mentioned several times that although the property is actually owned by the church, you're emphasizing that the money is for the cemetery maintenance and for the other area and for the community center, essentially. So I just want to confirm that none of this money would be used on the church itself. It's for the other things that you talked about.
Yeah, actually, the way the financial situation is set up, the church accounts are totally separate from the cemetery grounds and the other grounds as such. So the church accounts are totally separate. We don't have a full-time minister. We just pay the minister when he comes. So that would not affect that at all. What we're looking for is a grant for these grounds to look after that maintenance with the ground. The money would be going towards helping to maintain the grounds area, particularly the area where we are hoping to have the future parkland area. It runs us about almost $5,000 a year for the grass cutting for the entire area. So this would be, we're looking at it, dividing it off and say kind of the public area. We're looking for the support for the grass cutting of that area.
Okay, my other question is, I believe your group did get a grant from the Triathlon Fund 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes,
How
we
much
did.
was that, and what did you use it for?
Okay, actually, if you look at the bottom picture, we'll show it clearly. Again, with that concept of wanting to develop a public space and recognizing that there was no memorial for people to come on for Remembrance Day services and so on, we applied for a grant from you, and also the local Legion in St. Mary's supported us, and the public supported us. And you can see the memorial that we established there. And it's if you look at the top picture, you'll see that it is at the very front of the property. And we hold an outdoor Remembrance Day service. It's always on the Sunday before the official one of November the 11th, and it is always well attended there as well. And again, it's part of that concept. And yes, we received a grant from the council helping us to establish that memorial.
That's all I have questions. I do have a question for staff that's relative to this. So, and my question to staff is, can you give us some background about the Lakeside Triathlon Fund as to who funds it, what's the criteria for granting funds from it, who has received grants in the past, and what's the current balance?
Excuse me, so Multisport Canada funds it. That's who hosts the Lakeside Triathlon. The criteria, it can be requested through delegations to be used in the Lakeside community. And the only other request that we received was what we just spoke about for the stone memorial. And the current balance is the $1,000 that is being requested.
So there's 1,000 in there for, okay. So does it have to maintain a balance, or could we give Or should we make it, we can give the 1,000, we don't have to give
Yep.
999?
That's
Okay.
fine.
That's good.
Any other questions from council? Just before we finish with you and council moves on to whatever they want to ultimately do with this, it seems like a very, reasonable thing, I would say, first of all. But the other thing I would say is I would encourage you, in the interests of trying to make it into a community space, I would really encourage you to talk to recreation staff at the township about what that might look like going forwards, because I think, we certainly have mechanisms where we've done things in the past. The playground equipment at A.J. Baker a few years ago is, partially township funded and not on township property. I mean, there's concerns around that, but we've been able to manage those concerns and still get things done, right? So I would just encourage you to talk with recreation staff about, what does that look like going forward? What are the things that the community wants to do on that property? Because traditionally a municipality would say, we don't own that property, that's on you, and depending what you want to do, maybe that'll be the case. But it's not necessarily the case. So I would just encourage you to keep having those conversations with recreation staff. I think you'll get like a very, open-minded staff that'll say, like, let's talk about what you want to do and how we can do stuff that would benefit the whole community.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to deal with Councilor Mitchell?
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that the Township of Zorra Council approve a grant of $1,000 from the Lakeside Triathlon Fund to the Christchurch Lakeside Community Area Group to be used for ground maintenance and preparation for future expansion of a space for public use.
Councilor Mitchell.
Yes, number of reasons that I think we should give out this grant. First of all, it has no impact on the tax levy because it's funded by Multisport Canada, as Karen told us a few minutes ago. It will be used to maintain and enhance a cemetery, both a conventional cemetery that's been there for well over a century and also a new concept cemetery with the scattering gardens, which, as you can see in the picture, is a beautiful addition to the township. And people may choose to do that for a number of reasons, including financial. Township provides funding for 5 other cemeteries for a total of $28,000 in the recent budget, and also $14,000 to the Ingersoll Cemetery. And the reason we do that is because we want to assist the various cemetery boards and groups that operate these cemeteries, because if they weren't there to do it, it would fall back on municipalities. So I think the current system is better than having the municipalities add that to our long list of responsibilities. There are a few other groups in Lakeside that would qualify for this. Richard mentioned that the local Masonic Lodge is closing, and there's no other service clubs or other groups in there that would meet the criteria. And as Richard talked about in his presentation, Township doesn't provide public facilities in Lakeside. This is the option that the community is providing. The hall does have some historic significance in that it was the railway station at one point. He mentioned the potential small parkette, and I would agree with the mayor to get some guidance from our staff, who has a lot of expertise in that area, and also, as was indicated, the Veterans Memorial and Flagpole. So I think we should support this local group and provide the funds that are there to be used.
Anyone else? Yeah, I think this is a very modest and well-justified request, and the funds are available, and the funds are available specifically to do this. It's kind of a no-brainer. I think, yeah, I would just add to my comments before and say, Lakeside, in terms of community space, facilities, however you want to characterize it, probably undersized. I mean, I'm not talking about an ice pad or anything like that, but I mean, community space is good, and for people to meet, and that's long been a problem up in that area. Door Optimists for years have looked for places to meet. Other ad hoc community groups up there look for places to meet. And I mean, the drive to Thamesford Embro isn't that bad. I do it all the time myself, but a lot of the time in the winter, it is challenging for a lot of people to say, on a February night, we're going to do that. And if there is a hall available in the community, and space outside that people can use, and somebody's willing to make it happen, I think we should absolutely get behind it. So I think this is very, very reasonable. So anyone else before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. There you go. Reports from Public Services Department, 8.1 Roads Division Report 2025-123 from the Director of Public Services regarding a municipal salt management plan. Director Oliver, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Nothing to highlight at this time, no.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
Yeah, Steve, I enjoyed this report. It's titled the Salt Management Report, but there's a whole bunch in there about how you do winter maintenance and the equipment we have, the staffing we have. A couple questions. Last winter, as you know better than anybody, was probably the most severe winter we've had in 20 years or more, especially for snow accumulation. But the usage of rock salt and sand were both down significantly from the 5-year average. So why is that?
So there's kind of a two-part answer to that question. So firstly, it all depends on the winter prior to that winter. So if we didn't use a lot, so the 23-24 season, we had a fairly light winter. So our sand stock didn't get depleted too much. So we had quite a bit in storage and inventory going into the 24-25, right? So that means it didn't take as much to top up. So I think we put 2,000 ton in, which means we put 200 ton of salt with it. Also on top of that is weather and weather patterns make a big difference in how much we use. Last year, we got a lot of snow accumulation, but we also had consistent cold temperatures, which is much easier to maintain through the winter months. When we get a lot of freeze-thaw cycles and a lot of freezing rain events, especially freezing rain events, we tend to use a lot more salt and sand product in those winter season type events.
So it's kind of depends which pocket you're paying out of. We're paying more for snow
That's
removal.
correct.
We're paying less for salting and sanding.
Yeah, no, like you noticed, we didn't use much product last year, but our labor costs were really high.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, Kim?
Okay. And my other question is, I noticed that we didn't use any liquids. Did we ever use liquids where we sprayed pavement before when we were expecting freezing rain? And if we did, why don't we anymore? Or if we didn't, why don't we?
So also two-part answer to that question. So there's two types of processes you can use liquid for. There's something called anti-icing, is what you're referring to, is what they'll put on prior to a winter event, a storm. And that's intended to break the bond between the pavement and the snow, which in theory takes less salt to get you down to bare pavement. So there's that, in which we've never ever done that process. Larger centers such as within Oxford County has done it in the past. I don't see them using it a whole lot now. Not sure why. Town of Ingersoll still uses it quite a bit on their bridges and hills and before snow events. And then the other use of liquid is it's called pre-wetting. And that's where the equipment is set up with tanks. And as the sand salt, it's primarily meant for just straight salt application. It wets the salt before it hits, before it gets spread on the road. And the purpose for that is when you wet the salt, it doesn't roll as much. And also, the other purpose of pre-wetting is it lowers the temperature of where salt works. So salt will only work, just dry salt will only work up till about -9. When you wet it, it brings it down to about -12 to -15. So it works at a lower temperature. So, and about half of our trucks were set up with pre-wetting. Because we don't use straight salt, we don't use a lot of it. We don't see the advantage of it. And the equipment on the trucks is very expensive and expensive to maintain. It seems to be very problematic just because of the type of product. It's very corrosive stuff. So that's kind of the long answer to your short question.
Sure, that's good.
Can I just say, I love that. I think that's the first time I've ever heard actual chemistry get discussed at a council meeting. And I think the gold star for that. Thank you for bringing that.
Welcome.
No, as I said, I learned a lot from the report, and I just learned some more right now. And I hope anybody out there that is concerned about snow on their roads or streets has learned something too. So thanks, Steve.
Any other questions on the report? Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, second by Mitchell, that report 2025-123 be received for information purposes only, and that staff be directed to continue implementing the actions and best management practices outlined in the salt management plan, and that the updated salt management plan attached as Appendix A be endorsed by council.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And reports from Corporate Protective Services Department. 9.3 Financial Services, Report 2025-135 from the Manager of Financial Services regarding final costs and funding of the Zorra Municipal Center. Manager Grogan, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Nothing to highlight at this point. Happy to take any questions.
Questions from council on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, looks like a good news report from total financial cost and on a per square foot basis cost I've been looking forward to this report since the day we voted to proceed with the project. So thank you. Two questions. The funding says, did all the money from the land redevelopment reserve come from property sales, or was some of it from the tax levy?
So all of the funding that's from the Land Redevelopment Reserve came from net proceeds from the sale of property. So there was no tax levy impact.
So that's more good news, that actually the only tax levy money that went into it would have come out of the building department reserve. Everything else was grant or...
And just to clarify, the building department reserve is funded through building permits, so
Okay.
there was no tax levy implications
not a
from
tax-
that reserve as well.
Okay, so that, it came from the taxpayer, but then that's back to what we talked about a while ago, a user pays system, so, okay. And my other question was, I see in funding that the electric vehicle grant of $90,000 was including in the funding. What was the total cost of the 2 charging stations, and was that included in building components or land improvements?
So the total cost of the 2 EV chargers was $112,799.94, and that is grouped in the report as building components because for asset management purposes, it's considered building general miscellaneous electrical systems. So that's how it's categorized for asset management, which is why it was categorized that way on the report.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the report? Do I have a mover?
Moved by Stewart, second by Mitchell, that report 2025-135 from the Manager of Financial Services be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.3B, Report 2025-142 from the Manager of Financial Services Treasurer regarding reserve and reserve fund policy updates. Manager Grogan, again, is there anything you'd like to highlight for council?
As opposed to highlight, I'd just like to add a verbal update. There is an item on our agenda, item number 9.4B, regarding the Ingersoll Rural Cemetery Agreement. Depending on the outcome of that item, staff would suggest that we include an additional reserve for the Ingersoll Cemetery with the target balance to cover sufficient enough to meet asset management, with the sources of funding coming from the current year capital levy, proceeds from disposal of capital assets, as well as any annual surplus. And then I'd recommend the use of funding be in regards to repairs, replacement, and rehabilitation of cemetery capital, and to maintain service stability through years experiencing a deficit. So I would ask that when we address item number 9.4, consideration be given to include that reserve into our policy. Happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Just a question of clarification before I go to council then. The recommendation, staff's recommendation for item 9.4B, the recommendation would not be changed, correct? It would just be the actions that staff would take would change, but depending on what we did with that.
We're actually requesting that if that agreement is adopted by council, the recommendation include a clause to allow staff to add that reserve to our reserve policy.
For this one? For this one? So it's not going to change 9.3B though? Sorry, okay. All right. Any questions from council? Councilor Mitchell.
Just one question on this one, and I just was looking for some clarity on how a couple of these reserves are funded. So my question that I sent you, Kim, was in Appendix A, the road infrastructure and bridge infrastructure reserves are listed as being funded by current year capital tax levy only. We also receive funding from specific provincial and federal grant programs and neighboring municipalities for some projects. Are those revenue sources considered as capital tax levy funding, or do they not go into reserves because they're designated for specific capital projects? And I'm going deep into the weeds on this one, but I'm curious what is actually considered capital tax.
So a bridge or road project can have alternative funding sources other than just the road infrastructure reserve and the building infrastructure reserve. The reserves are set up to be funded through our current year capital levy. The treatment of the alternative sources of revenue to fund those projects depends on the specific source of funding, but regardless of that, all are considered part of the capital plan and do not directly impact the capital levy portion of our operating budget. So if we look specifically at provincial and federal grants that we get that are related to capital projects, essentially there's two funds that we receive annually. So we receive funding from the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. Sometimes we refer to that as OCIF funding. That is allocated to specific capital projects and fully spent each year. So there's no residual balance in that fund that's available to put into reserve for future projects. We also receive funds from the Canada Community Build Fund, which was formerly known as the Federal Gas Tax Fund. Those funds are also designated for specific capital projects, and any funds that are not spent in a given year are held in a specific reserve fund, as it is part of the agreement with Canada that we actually have to hold those funds separately. Those are recorded as deferred revenue obligatory reserve funds on our financial statements, and treated slightly different than the OCIF funds that we get. As far as funding from neighboring municipalities, they're only billed for their portion of specific capital projects, and funding is included in the capital plan. There's no residual amounts that we receive from neighboring municipalities in regards to those capital projects, so there's no funds that are available to be placed into reserve.
So what I get from that is that any bridge or road capital project can be funded out of the infrastructure reserve, which comes out of the tax levy. It can come out of the provincial and or federal funding of some form.
Yes.
And in some cases, it come from the neighboring municipalities, or some combination of all three of those things.
That is correct.
Okay, that's good. Good long answers to get a final solution.
Just a follow-up from me, I mean, that doesn't speak to like specific grants that we might get for specific projects. I'm thinking about 31st Line a few years ago, we got, I can't remember how much, but when we repaved that, that was a few $100,000, I can't remember exactly, but. 1 million, I think. Was it? Yeah, it was a big one. Okay. Yeah.
So what I was trying to establish is all those other monies never goes into the reserve. It's specifically for that, and Kim just talked about if there's overages, how that's handled. But that's what I was trying to clarify in my own mind, is the reserve itself and the role that it plays in this. So, thanks, Kim.
Any other questions?
Her answer was longer than yours, Steve.
But no chemistry. Any other questions? Have a mover?
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that council endorse the amendments to the reserve and reserve fund policy as attached to report 2025-142.
Is there any discussion? All's in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.3C, Report 2025-141 from the Manager of Financial Services Treasurer regarding proposed investment policy. Manager Grogan.
Nothing to add at this time. Happy to take any questions.
Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I have 4 questions. They're shorter. And I'm really interested in this because I'm also been on the Finance and Audit Committee at the Upper Thames Board, and the Upper Thames does have significant investments. And I'm really interested in this new policy. So my first question was, the 2025 budget projected interest and dividend revenue of $488,000. Since this is a new policy, how has the township been investing up till now?
So due to cash flow, the township has historically only held temporary short-term investments. The only current bank investments that are held by the township are in regards to the North Embro Cemetery Trust. These investments are reported on the trust fund financial statements and follow the Bereavement Association of Ontario regulations and restrictions. The interest and dividend revenue that is shown in our operating budget is the result of bank interest and dividends earned on the township's financial investment in government business enterprise as the result of our partial ownership of Earth Corporation.
My second question is, would several reserves and reserve funds be grouped together for investment purposes, or do they have to be kept separate?
So reserves could absolutely be grouped together for investment purposes, and there would then be an allocation of the overall interest reserve or overall interest earned to each of the participating reserves. Staff would need to review agreements and regulations related to each of the reserve funds that we're required to hold in order to determine if investments could be held in a group or if they're required to remain segregated.
Okay. My third question is, will the township be hiring an investment firm to manage the portfolio? And if so, what is the hiring process for the service?
So at this time, there's no plans to hire an investment firm, as the recommendation included in my report is that the municipality not become prudent investors for the reasons that are outlined in the report.
And those are all solid reasons, I think, for the dollars, the potential return on investment, the reasons that the extra work that would need to go in, it makes sense at this point not to take that step. But the follow-up to that, by not becoming a prudent investor, does that mean, I think we're going to be prudent investors. We're just not going to come up to the standard, the official standard. So would that limit us to investing in bank accounts and GICs, or are there some other, could we do bonds or anything else?
Essentially, yes, we're restricted. The policy actually states, I believe it's on Schedule 1 of the policy, it actually lists out what investment sectors we're allowed to actually participate in addition to allowable investments in financial institutions. There is the One Investment program that is specific to municipalities, and we're able to invest in that program, and that program focuses on bonds as opposed to GICs.
Okay, thanks, Kim.
Any other questions? Have a mover.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that council endorse and adopt investment policy 500-13 as attached to report 2025-141.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
I think having investment policy is a great idea. We do have money, significant dollars in reserves, and we should be trying to maximize whatever return we can get on it. Given the restrictions that, we can't be out there speculating, it has to be safe, but I think anything that can give us another revenue stream is a good thing.
Anyone else? I would also add, like, sort of in reference to some of the answers to some of your questions, like in a way, like some residents might sort of say, well, shouldn't you have more money and then you could become a prudent investor and you could get more return? But I would just remind everyone that that's like, that's our money as residents that we're taking then to invest, right? And I think that's, so it's prudent to only have what you reasonably need in reserve to actually manage the projects and manage cash flow, and not much more than that. To me, this policy sort of identifies that and the sort of sweet spot of having enough to manage our assets, enough to manage the cash flow, and not so much that we would want to say, we need to go and get someone to advise us how to invest these tens of millions of dollars because it's other people's money. Councillor Mitchell.
Our job is to provide services. We collect money to provide services. Rather than putting that money under the mattress, we should maximize it. So that's what this is all about.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.4 Legislative Services, Report 2025-126 from the Director of Corporate and Protective Services regarding municipal support confirmation for the Bolton Manor LT2 project. Director Martin, is there anything you'd like to highlight for Council?
No, thank you.
Questions from Council on the report? Oh, sorry, I would just remind Council too that we do have several people here, the engineer for the project and Oxford County planner, if you have detailed questions on it. But any questions on the report? Mover?
Moved by Stewart, second by Mitchell, that the Township of Zorra support the submission of a proposal for a long-term capacity project under the IESO's LT2 procurement process for the Bolton Power Plant project as proposed by Bolton Manor Resilient Generation 2.0 Inc., the applicant, and as described in the proposal overview attached to the Township of Zorra Report 2025-126, and that this resolution's sole purpose is to satisfy the mandatory requirements of Section 4.2C3 of the LT2 C1 RFP, and may not be used for the purpose of any other form of approval in relation to the proposal or long-term capacity project or for any other purpose, and that the proponent has, no later than 60 days prior to the proposal submission deadline of December 18th, 2025, delivered a pre-engagement confirmation notice to the clerk/CAO in respect of the Township of Zorra, and that the proponent has undertaken community engagement activities in respect of the long-term capacity project to the satisfaction of council, and that council is satisfied with the engagement activities undertaken for the project and as discussed in report number 2025-126, and that the subject lands include lands designated as agricultural reserve, which represents the prime agricultural area in the County of Oxford official plan as of the date of this resolution, and that as such, the Township of Zorra confirms that, one, the subject lands are not designated as a specialty crop area. Two, the project is not a rooftop solar project. Example, ground-mounted solar is a non-rooftop solar project. Not a non, sorry, let me read that one again. Two, the project is not a non-rooftop solar project. Example, ground-mounted solar. Three, council is satisfied with the AIA component 1 requirement as provided by the applicant. Four, if the Bolton Power Plant project is selected under the LT2 RFP, the Township of Zorra will engage in good faith with the applicant to enable the applicant to complete the agricultural impact assessment components 2 and 3 requirement. It is the responsibility of the applicant to fulfill any timelines of the IESO and align these timelines with those of other approvals where applicable.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I spoke at length a couple meetings ago when council kind of changed our support policies in line with the new IESO and OMAFA policies on green energy generation, dividing farm-related projects and non-farm-related projects. So I'm not going to repeat everything I said then. I do have a whole list of why I think we should support this. Top of the list is it's specific to this project. It doesn't impact our support or non-support for any other green energy project that may come before us in the future.
Any other discussion? Very supportive of this. Happy to see it go forward. For other reasons, not this application, visited the site a month ago or something like that. and the one that's already up and running there, and happy to see this move forward for a whole bunch of reasons, as he said, you know, agriculture, business, energy, green energy, it's all good. Very happy to see this go forward. And especially, I mean, like all joking, like that's really long, but all joking aside, I mean, I think there's a lot of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed with respect to what it does and doesn't offer the applicant and the IESO, and to protect the township against, and all those things. So I was kind of smiling to myself how long it was, but at the same time as it went on, I was like, yeah, we need all that stuff in there. So I'm very happy to see this. Anybody else before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.4B, Report 2025-138 from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding the Ingersoll Rural Cemetery Agreement and Transition. CAO Larder, is there anything you'd like to highlight for Council?
This project has been in the works for a number of years, and I want to thank staff for all the work that they have done to see it come to the end here. And so this is the final stage with an agreement.
Questions from Council? Have a mover?
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that Report 2025-138 be received and filed for Council's information, and that bylaw number 60-25 to approve a service agreement between the Town of Ingersoll and the Township of Zorra for the operation of the Ingersoll Rural Cemetery be approved. And further, that the Chief Administrative Officer and Clerk be authorized and directed to execute the service agreement and any related documents, and to undertake all actions necessary to implement Council's decision. And further, that the Ingersoll Rural Cemetery Board be hereby discontinued effective December 31st, 2025, and that Reserve and Reserve Fund Policy 500-07 be updated to include an Ingersoll Cemetery Reserve.
Any discussion? Councilor.
Just as a outgoing member of the board there in the Ingersoll Rural Cemetery, I want to echo CAO's thanks to staff. There was a lot of work behind the scenes supporting the board in getting this to the end, and I think it was a overall very smooth transition here, and want to also thank the longtime staff at the cemetery as well.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Report 2025-139 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding the Embro Dog Park Committee. Coordinator McLaughlin, is there anything you'd like to highlight for Council before I ask them for questions?
Nothing to highlight.
Questions from Council on the report? Do I have a mover? Councilor.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, second by Councillor Stewart, that Council adopt the terms of reference for the Embro Dog Park Committee, and the Council endorsed Bylaw 56-25 to appoint the members of the Embro Dog Park Committee, and that Council approved the Embro Dog Park Committee to establish a Facebook page deviating from Policy 200-22 social media.
Is there any discussion? A question, just as I was thinking about that. Should we, I think our practice has become, when we establish these committees, that we deviate from the social media policy to allow them to set up a Facebook page. Should we be looking at just changing that policy to give staff the permission to just do that when we set up the committee? If they want to do it, like I don't think it should necessarily require a, if we have policy, I don't think it should necessarily require a resolution from Council to say set up a Facebook page. Okay. Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 10, correspondence requiring direction. Correspondence from the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority and Kettle Creek Conservation Authority regarding Bill 68. Do I have any questions or a mover? Councilor Mitchell.
Mover and then some comments. What's that? I would be negligent if I didn't. Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Stewart. Whereas the Conservation Authorities Act 1946 enables municipalities to establish local conservation authorities, and when municipalities choose to form such authorities, they assume responsibility for governance and funding through the appointment of a board of directors and the provision of an annual levy to cover expenses. And whereas the Township of Zorra established the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, initially formed in 1947, and whereas local municipalities currently provide approximately 35% of total Conservation Authority funding, while the province of Ontario provides approximately 2% according to the 2026 budget. And whereas municipalities have governed their respective conservation authorities for decades, tailoring programs and services to local watershed needs, maintaining accountable service standards, and ensuring fair and predictable costs for ratepayers. And whereas conservation authorities collectively own and manage thousands of acres of land, many of these properties were entrusted to the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority for long-term protection, stewardship, and the public good, with the expectation that such lands would be cared for by locally governed conservation authorities. And whereas Bill 68, Schedule 3, proposes the creation of the Ontario Provincial Conservation Agency, a Crown corporation that would assume governance responsibilities and consolidate Ontario's 36 conservation authorities into 7 regional authorities, with municipal cost apportionment yet to be defined. And whereas the province already possesses the authority to establish overarching legislation, regulations, and standards through the Conservation Authorities Act and the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, and now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Zorra calls on the Government of Ontario to maintain local, independent, municipally governed, watershed-based conservation authorities to ensure strong local representation in decisions related to municipal levies, community-focused service delivery, and the protection and the management of conservation lands. And further, that while the Township of Zorra supports provincial goals for consistent permit approval processes, shared services, and digital modernization, imposing a new top-down agency and structure without strong local accountability and governance risks creating unnecessary cost, red tape, and bureaucracy, thereby undermining efficiency and responsiveness to local community needs. And further, that the Township of Zorra supports efforts to balance expertise, capacity, and program delivery across the province, and requests that the province work collaboratively with municipalities and local conservation authorities to determine the most effective level of strategic consolidation to achieve both provincial and local objectives. And further, that a copy of this resolution be sent to Premier Doug Ford, the Ontario Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks, Ernie Hardeman, MPP for the riding of Oxford, Rural Ontario Municipal Association, all municipalities in the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority watershed, all conservation authorities in Ontario, and Conservation Ontario.
Councillor Mitchell is the mover.
Yes, so I've spoken at the last 2 meetings when I reported on Upper Thames board meetings, so I'm not going to go real deep into this, but I think the material that was included in our agenda give a good overview of the impact of this proposal and what's being proposed. And I also hope that Council had an opportunity to review the agenda and the presentation that was at the November 25th Upper Thames board meeting for a lot more in-depth information. I would point out, though, that the Upper Thames municipal levy is 35% roughly of the operating budget. The Conservation Act allows for the municipal levy to be, or for the operating budget costs to be 100% funded by municipal levy. So there's I would think, a fairly good chance that if we're combined with 7 other conservation authorities, that at least some of them will be well over the 35%. I've been told that Upper Thames is one of the lowest municipal levies in the province, that there are some that are in the 70, 80, 90% municipal levy to cover their costs. Upper Thames doesn't do that. For one of the reasons is because they have a tremendous track record of getting grants to fund their operations. A number of municipalities have passed similar motions to this one. We had at least, I think, a dozen or so on our agenda at yesterday's board meeting. And the reason we need municipalities to get involved in this fight is that the provincial government has shown little respect for conservation authorities over the last 7 years. Few examples is the ongoing freeze on planning and freeze on fees for planning and permitting, which looks good politically that they're keeping the price of construction down, but it still costs money to provide that service, and so that money's coming out of the municipal levy rather than user pay. Another example is the numerous legislation change that have radically changed how conservation authorities, breaking us down into the 3 different streams, and that has had a big impact on our budgeting process. And this change, this legislation, the conservation authorities were given 1 hour notice that there was going to be a press conference. So there was absolutely no consultation beforehand. The consultation, from what our GM and our chair have told us, has been virtually useless up to this, since this announcement was made. There's been a couple of video meetings, but still there is a ton of information that's not known as the timeframes, who's going to fund it, and all other sorts of information. So we need municipalities to support the conservation authorities, because as in the report, there will be, if this goes forward and the combination, the reduction from 36, I will point out that the only existing conservation authority that is not being combined with anybody else is in the Toronto area, and I doubt if that's just a coincidence. The one thing I would ask, if we do pass this motion, if staff could please forward this to the ministry tomorrow or Friday at the very latest, because the cutoff to submit is next Monday, the 22nd. It's only a 45-day period, so if we pass that, I would ask that it's at the top of your to-do list. I would appreciate that. So that's my comments added to what I've said at previous meetings. I tell you, board meetings have been very strange the last two meetings. There's kind of a funeral atmosphere there.
Any other discussion? A couple things I would just add. Oxford County Council passed a version of that at last week's council meeting. And CAO Larder and I attended what was it called, a regional engagement session on Friday afternoon in London on this. About 100 people, I think, there-ish, something like that. And some people from the province to talk about what this was going to look like and what consultation, opinions they were looking for from us, and we told them. I support this motion on the floor. I don't think that, I'm not opposed to restructuring. I think we always need to, in all levels of government, be willing to look at, how we do things and does it best serve residents. So I don't necessarily have a reason to say that conservation authorities shouldn't be examined in the same way, but I don't see evidence that this will in fact serve residents any better, or the watershed any better. The part of the proposal is to create literally another layer of bureaucracy above the boards that we have now, between the ministry and the boards. I don't understand if they need the conservation authorities to do something. I mean, the minister can literally just write an OREG and then they have to do that. That's now the law. They can just make them do that. Additionally, they made clear several times that there was no changes in funding, but I took a picture of the one slide they had up because it talked about proposed agency funding sources. So for the new bureaucratic agency that does not exist today but will exist to provide oversight, establish key performance indicators, and give directives to the conservation authorities. The proposed funding sources were provincial funding, I should hope so, fees for services. I don't know what services they would be recovering fees on, since they're supposed to be just oversight, and cost recovery from conservation authorities, which, as you said, are mainly funded through levy. So that would, if I'm not mistaken, mean that municipal property tax bills would be funding a provincial agency to do its work, which we don't have the agency or the funding burden right now. So, I don't see how this is going to serve anybody better than what we have today. That's not to say that I don't think people couldn't be served better than they are today, but I don't see a path forward for it here. And lastly, I would say for residents or developers or anybody who's ever been frustrated with conservation authorities and felt that, the conservation authority is inflexible and they're just applying the regulation and they're not listening. Well, if you thought that conservation authorities of this size were inflexible and not local and unwilling to listen, just wait. Just wait until you're dealing with a conservation authority that reaches all the way from Windsor to Waterloo. And if we're dealing with a conservation authority that includes the City of London, Region of Waterloo, City of Windsor, Chatham, etc., good luck getting somebody to stand in a ditch with you in rural Zorra Township to solve a drainage issue. So I'm happy to support this. Councilor.
One other point, I talked after our previous board meeting, I talked to the Director of Finance at the Upper Thames, and one of her major concerns is that this new structure would appear that much of the smaller funding from agencies and different groups, the new regional conservation authorities would no longer be eligible for that amount of funding, which would mean that that money has to come from the municipal levy rather than the 35% that comes from funding. That was top of her list of concerns about this whole thing.
Additionally, I heard from some CAs that there were some land, like private land donations that had been made in other CAs that were then revoked after this was announced because people felt they no longer were going to have, they were no longer giving this land to a locally accountable agency. They were giving it to sort of a large, nameless, faceless thing, and they no longer wanted to do that. So
that's another concern. A lot, as it said in the motion, a lot of this stuff was entrusted to local people, and they don't want somebody representing Milton or Windsor making a decision on their 50 acres that they bequeathed or whatever to the local people for the use of local people.
anyone else before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 11, there's A and B, boards and committees. A is Upper Thames River Conservation Authority Board update from Board Member Mitchell, and B is Zorra Maltese Courts Committee 2025-1202 agenda, 2025-03, 11 minutes, and 2025-09, 25 minutes. Is there any questions before I turn it over to Councillor Mitchell for his update? Councillor Mitchell.
Okay, we did have a special meeting yesterday for the Upper Thames Board to get the latest information on this amalgamation, and also there was some agenda items that we didn't get to the previous month because of our discussions about this new legislation. We adopted our strategic plan, which had been worked on for a year and a half at least, with the staff and an outside consultant. We talked about the Upper Thames response, their official response to the ministry for about the amalgamation. There are 10 recommendations. I'm not going to go through them all. If anybody wants to question me on any of them, please feel free. If somebody wants to read it later, that's fine. We reviewed the annual update on the 2026 fee schedule. Once again, the freeze on the planning and registration fees. We haven't heard officially whether it's going to carry on, but we assume it will. There was no overall cost of inflation increase, but there were some minor increases in some areas that were related to cost recovery. And they're introducing a new option at the conservation areas, which they're calling a year-round membership, which right now, up till now, we've had open season, which is basically May through to Thanksgiving. And then 2 or 3 years ago, we added shoulder season, which was like a month in April to May, and then about 6 weeks or so in the fall, which were the conservation areas weren't fully staffed as they are during open season, but people still had access to come and use the facilities. And then other than that, it was closed season. So as far as using the facilities, you could get on the trails and that sort of thing, but as far as going into the main part of the conservation authorities, that wasn't able to do. So what they're doing now is introducing open season and the rest of the season, or the rest of the year, and they will be installing upgrades to the gates, whereas the gates up till now have been manually operated. The new gates will be automatic type gates where you can scan either off your phone or some type of a card to get in during daylight hours to use the facilities. We had a report on the planning and permit service delivery review, and that was, we had the two consultants from Blackline Consultants who had done a report on that department. And ironically, that's one of the main reason the province is claiming that they need to consolidate the conservation authorities is because different authorities have different permitting processes, and that's causing a delay. And we recognize that there are quite significant improvements that could be made in the planning and permitting part of it. So the consultants asked 3 questions. Is the current state of planning and permitting department, is it efficient? Which they said no. Is it effective? Which they said yes. And does it provide an adequate service? Which they said no. And they came up with 9 recommendations to implement to have yes answers to all 3 of those. Our staff in those departments that were consulted on this are in agreement with these recommendations. The question on this, and to a lesser degree is the strategic plan, is how much resources and how fast do we move on making these changes. There are some low-hanging fruit that staff are going to work on right away, but what's the point of putting a lot of resources into a system that probably is not going to exist in a year, at least not in the form it is now. So it would be great to have the strategic plan and this review, and in both cases there's implementation plans in place. It'd be great to get at it, get it done, as we do here. But as I say, there's certainly some hesitancy to spend a lot of money and put a lot of work into something that may be totally moot in the not too distant future. So, as I said, very strange atmosphere at the board meetings these days.
Any questions? Do I have a mover?
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, second by Councillor Stewart, that items 11A and B be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 12, information items. There's 3 items there. A, correspondence from Minister Rob Flack regarding Bill 17. B, letter from the Honorable Michael S. Kurtzner, Solicitor General, regarding 2026 Ontario Provincial Police Annual Billing Statements. And C, Earth Media release regarding Ontario Power Acquisition. Any questions on any of those before I ask for a mover? Can I have a mover? Councillor Mitchell.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, second by Councillor Stewart, that items 12A to C be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 13, unfinished business. Zone change applications at N5-24-13 submitted by 409315 Ontario Limited, Happy Hills Resort, pertaining to lands described as Lot 25, Concession 1, West Zorra, municipally known as 923590 Road 92, 316489, 31st line. Spencer, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Yes, thank you. Council may remember this application as it did come before council earlier this year. At that time, the statutory public meeting was held in relation to the application that was before council, and the only concern at that time was concern held by staff. There were some concerns primarily surrounding the actual design and use of the structure itself. It was showing at that time being individual self-contained storage unit type of facility. The applicants have worked with planning staff and building staff over the course of 10 or so months here to get to the point where the revised application, similar sized building, but the design itself is different, and it's such that will no longer host individual tenants, as more just an accessory structure for the park, so they can accommodate their golf carts and their other equipment they use for maintenance and other needs for the park. The location of it itself, as shown on the plate before council, there is an existing cleared area on the park in the Rec 7 portion in the south end of the site, southwest area of the site. That is the proposed location for this building, which is approximately 3,000 square feet in size. Staff have also added a provision just speaking to the maximum height. Wasn't necessarily requested at that time with the application. However, the 4-meter cap. Staff did feel it's appropriate in this case to allow a 5-meter height. Given the proposed accessory structure, we do feel it's appropriate and acceptable for the subject property. And it's appropriate to allow for the continuation of what we consider a non-conforming use within the county's agricultural reserve. The applicants are here tonight to answer any questions council may have, but staff are supportive of the application. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
Spencer, you mentioned that the design, the usage, and the size are, design and usage have changed. The size is approximately the same. Is the location the same as the previous application?
Through the mayor to Councillor Mitchell's question, the location and the size of the structure are the same. There has not been a specific drawing showing the actual setback from the property lines at this location. However, we've taken a look at it at the staff level and note that it should be compliant. There should be no issue complying with the Rec 7 provisions and the broader Rec provisions. But yeah, the real key factor here at the time that this was before council last time around was just the use itself and the design of the building being such that it would have accommodated something like 30 individual storage units, and now that's no longer the case, and it's used for the park's broader purposes for their equipment. So
we've come up with, or you've come up with a compromise solution here.
We have, yep. The Bakers have worked with staff over the course of a number of months here to arrive at what's before council today.
That was the purpose of the deferrals.
Any other questions? Do I have a mover? Councilor Mitchell.
Moved by Councilor Mitchell, seconded by Councilor Stewart, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve the zone change application submitted by 409315 Ontario Limited, whereby the lands described as Lot 25, Concession 1, West Zorra, Township of Zorra, to amend the existing Rec 7 zone to include an accessory storage building, 277 meters square in size, and with a maximum height of 5 meters, 16.4 feet, as a permitted use on the subject property.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no notices of motion. Bylaws. Do I have a mover?
This could be a tongue twister. But moved by Councilor Mitchell, seconded by Councilor Stewart. The bylaws 56-25, 57-25, 58-25, 59-25, 60-25, 61-25, 62-25, 63-25, and 64-25 be taken as read at first, second, and third time, and finally passed, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Items of community interest in the calendar. Anybody got anything? Calthumpian Santa Claus Parade this Sunday night, I think 6 o'clock-ish. Gather at 6 o'clock, probably parade sometime after that. And then I don't have anything. There's something going on the 24th and 25th, and on the 1st then, and other than that, I don't see anything. Anybody got anything? No? Okay.
I think most of the area churches have got some type of, but I don't have a specific list. And I think everybody else is just chilling out for the holidays.
I didn't see Deputy Mayor for anything, no? Okay. So that's it for items of community interest. Motion to go into closed.
Moved by Councilor Mitchell, seconded by Councilor Stewart. The council move into closed meeting session at 7:26 p.m. pursuant to section 239.2B, personal matters but an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. 7:39, we are back from closed and matters arising from closed. Nobody wants to hear me that loud. Councillor Mitchell.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that Zorra formally appoint Adam J. Stewart to the Rural Oxford Economic Development ROEDC Board effective immediately, and the council directs staff to send a thank you to Rob Parkhill for all his service on the ROEDC board.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Confirmatory and adjournment. Who has confirmatory? Paul?
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that bylaw 65-25, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held December 17th, 2025, be read a first, second, and third time this December 17th, 2025, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 7:40 p.m. and the next meeting of council be called for January 22nd, 2025 at 9:30 a.m. in the council chambers at the Zorra Municipal Center.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We are adjourned.